There are moments in life so quiet and simple that they go unnoticed by most, but they carry the power to change everything. And this is one such story, the story of a man who thought he had lost all reason to care, and a woman who asked for nothing but the leftovers from his plate and forever changed both their lives forever. And as you listen to this tale, I ask you to think about the countless unseen faces you pass every day. The strangers at bus stops, the mothers in parking lots, the old men on park benches whose quiet courage and quiet desperation might hold a story that could move you, if only you pause long enough to hear it. And so begins the story of John Maxwell, a man of vast wealth who dined alone in the finest restaurant in the city, a place of shining crystal and hushed voices where the poor and the struggling never entered. John sat at his usual table, staring at untouched food, tasting nothing, thinking only of his late wife and the daughter he had buried years before, and wishing this expensive meal could fill the emptiness inside him, when he noticed a young woman standing nearby, awkward, hesitant, but with a strange, quiet dignity about her, and in her arms a baby no older than a year, and her clothes worn but clean, her eyes tired but fierce, and as she softly asked, "Sir, may I have your leftovers for my child?" Every sound in the restaurant seemed to hush. Forks paused in midair, waiters froze, and John stared surprised, not by the request itself, but by the calm, brave way she said it, without shame, without begging. This moment reflects thousands of hidden moments around the world, moments where people in need ask not for handouts, but for survival. Like the viral story of the homeless man in Detroit who approached diners asking only for their scraps until one kind stranger bought him a full meal and changed his life, or the tale of the struggling mother in New York who left a note asking for help with baby formula at a store and was gifted a month's supply by an anonymous customer. And John felt a flicker of something forgotten, human connection, curiosity, empathy. And so he quietly offered the untouched food, watching as she took it carefully, breaking soft pieces for her baby, feeding him with gentle patience and love, not devouring the food herself, but giving every crumb to her child. And John felt the first crack in his emotional armor, because this woman was not what the world might think, not a beggar, not a scammer, but a mother doing what she must to keep her child alive. And when she finished feeding him, she thanked John, softly turned, and left, disappearing into the night. But John could not shake the image from his mind, and so he left his untouched meal and followed at a distance down city streets until he saw her pause beside a battered old car, open the door, and gently settle her baby onto blankets in the back seat, her home. And she sat beside him, singing softly, brushing his hair, smiling in the cold. And John stood frozen, realizing he had just seen real courage, the kind no amount of money could buy. And in the next part, we will see how this quiet encounter stirs something deep in John's heart, and how his simple choice to care becomes the beginning of an unexpected journey of redemption and hope, and the reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness may change the course of a life forever. As John stood in the falling snow, watching the young woman gently rock her baby to sleep in the back of that broken-down car, something deep within him stirred, a feeling long buried beneath years of wealth, isolation, and grief. For he had spent his fortune building towers, investing in companies, collecting rare art and fine wines. But he had forgotten what it meant to see another human being, not as a nuisance or a problem to be solved, but as a soul fighting to survive. And he knew at that moment he could not simply walk away. He could not return to his empty mansion and untouched meals, knowing that a baby slept in the cold and a mother sang lullabies against despair. And so the next morning, quietly, without fanfare, John returned to the restaurant, and slipping unnoticed by staff, he left bags of groceries, baby food, diapers, and warm blankets beside the battered car where Emily still slept, curled around her child. And this silent kindness mirrors real-life moments like the anonymous donors in New Orleans who left Christmas gifts and groceries on the doorsteps of struggling families, or the unknown patron in London who paid the rent of dozens of tenants during the worst months of the pandemic without seeking thanks or credit. Emily awoke to find these treasures of survival, bewildered but grateful, clutching the formula to her chest as tears filled her eyes. But she knew not who had given this gift, only that someone had seen her, someone had cared, and John watched from across the street, hidden in his car, heart pounding with a strange joy he had not felt in years, as if for the first time he mattered not for his money or name, but for simple human mercy, and each day he brought more fresh food, medicine toys, small things that made life bearable. And Emily slowly dared to hope again, smiling as Noah grew stronger, healthier, laughing as he hugged the stuffed bear left on the hood of their car. And this secret ritual continued until winter deepened and one night disaster struck as Emily rushed into the night cradling Noah. Burning with fever, his tiny face flushed and gasping, and when the hospital turned her away for lack of insurance, her last desperate call was to John, the strange kind stranger who had fed them in. Silence and without hesitation. John sped to her side, carried them both into the warmth of his car, and drove to the best hospital in the city, where his name, his power, his money opened doors that had closed on Emily, and her child and doctors hurried to save the baby, treating him with care and skill until at last the fever broke and life returned to Noah's eyes, and John stood at the window, watching as Emily wept in relief, holding her baby close. And in this moment, John felt the old pain of losing his own child ease, as if by saving this one he had reclaimed a part of himself. And yet, as the news spread, as reporters snapped photos of the billionaire with the homeless mother and child, the world reacted with cruel gossip, cruel praise, cruel questions, and Emily, afraid of being a spectacle, prepared to flee. But John stood before the cameras and spoke his truth, telling the world of his loss, of Emily's quiet courage, of the shame of a society that let mothers beg for scraps, while the rich dined in silence in this bold act. Mirrors real moments like the time a San Francisco tech CEO funded housing for an entire block of homeless veterans after meeting one man, or the viral campaign where a janitor's medical bills were paid by hundreds of strangers who learned of his silent suffering, and as public opinion turned to compassion, support poured in, donations offers of work housing kindness, and Emily's story became a symbol of dignity and survival. And in the next part, we will see how Emily finds her strength, reconnects with her past, and builds a future where she is no longer the beggar at the door, but the keeper of her own destiny, proving that every act of kindness sows the seeds of renewal. As the days turned to weeks after the hospital incident, Emily found herself standing at a crossroads of her life. For the first time in years, she was no longer simply surviving, no longer hiding in the shadows of parking lots or scraping coins for formula. Instead, she had the chance to shape her future, to build a life for herself and her son with her own hands and heart. And it terrified her because, for so long, survival had been her only goal. And now the future stretched wide and uncertain before her. And John Maxwell, the man who had once been a stranger, a silent witness to her quiet courage, now stood beside her, not as a rescuer or benefactor, but as a friend offering support without demands, guidance without control. And it was during this time that Emily received a letter from her mother, a letter she never thought would come, begging for forgiveness, asking to meet the grandson she had never seen. And Emily, torn by years of hurt, by memories of fights and tears, by the shame of her failures, hesitated, unsure whether to open old wounds, but John gently encouraged her to try, reminding her of his own regrets, his own family lost to silence and pride. And so Emily gathered Noah in her arms and returned to the small house she had fled long ago, where her mother waited tearful and trembling on the porch. And their reunion, filled with awkward words and quiet tears, healed a fracture that had haunted Emily's heart for too long. And this moment of reconciliation reflects the real-life stories of families broken and mended by crisis, like the tale of Elizabeth Smart, who after surviving abduction rebuilt trust with her family, or the countless homeless youth who found second chances through reconnecting with parents in shelters and faith-based programs across the country. And as Emily's family embraced her once more, offering her and Noah a room's safety warmth, she began to believe in possibility again, in the idea that her life could be more than survival, that her child could grow without fear. John, proud but distant, respected her wish to stand on her own, declining to interfere, offering quiet help only when asked, and Emily, determined to earn her future, took a job at a local daycare working with children, saving every dollar, dreaming of a small apartment, of stability, of peace, and the city that once ignored her now watched with admiration, inspired by her strength, her dignity, her refusal to accept pity. And John, too, found healing in this journey, finding purpose beyond business and profit, serving quietly at shelters, funding scholarships for single mothers, anonymously never forgetting the woman who reminded him that wealth is worthless without compassion. And this echoes the true stories of people like Chris Gardner, whose struggle with homelessness as a single father inspired millions, or Joanne Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter in poverty before changing literary history, both proving that despair can birth greatness if courage remains, and Emily's courage did not falter. She worked, tirelessly cared for Noah, rebuilt bridges with old friends, volunteered at the very shelter where she once sought refuge, and slowly the girl who once begged for leftovers in a fancy restaurant became a symbol of hope for others. Women lost in fear, families broken by hardship who saw in her the proof that redemption was possible. And in the next part, we will see how Emily's quiet rise leads to a new beginning. Not of fairy tale wealth or sudden fortune, but of lasting purpose and joy as her journey closes with a lesson the world must remember, that true riches lie in dignity and love, not in gold or fame. Years passed, and the city that once turned its gaze away from the young mother who had asked for leftovers in a glittering restaurant came to embrace her as a quiet hero, for Emily, who had once lived in the shadows, now stood in the light of her own making. Not because she married wealth or found sudden fame, but because she built something lasting from dignity and resolve. And it began with a small dream, born in late nights, as she rocked Noah to sleep, whispering promises of a better life. And slowly, piece by piece, Emily made those promises real, saving every dollar from her daycare job, taking classes at night, learning childcare business skills, speaking at shelters and women's groups, telling her story not with pride but with truth, showing that survival could bloom into strength, and soon others joined her. Women who knew hunger, fear, loneliness, who wanted work and worth not pity. And together they opened Hope's Corner, a childcare center run by and for single mothers offering training jobs, safety and joy for children and their mothers alike. And this center became more than a business. It became a movement inspiring similar spaces in nearby towns, supported quietly by John Maxwell, who remained in the background, funding scholarships, supplies legal help, always respecting Emily's independence. Always remembering the night when a quiet voice in a grand restaurant asked for scraps and opened his heart, and Hope's Corner thrived, hosting free classes for mothers, resume workshops, health clinics, counseling sessions, all staffed by volunteers, many of them once homeless themselves, now standing tall with new purpose. And this ripple of renewal mirrored true stories like that of Rosie Batty in Australia, whose tragic loss led her to champion domestic violence reforms, or Debbie Sterling, the engineer who founded Goldie Blocks to empower young girls in STEM fields after facing gender bias. And Emily's face often graced local magazines, news segments, hailed as a community leader. But she kept her life simple, focused on Noah, who grew strong, clever, joyful, loved by friends, teachers, and neighbors who never knew he was. Once the baby fed on leftovers in a cold car, and John aged quietly watching from afar. Content at last to see the fruit of quiet, giving the proof that money, when guided by compassion, could heal and not harm. Their friendship remained a rare treasure built on trust without demands, sometimes sharing coffee walks, talks of life but never crossing the line into expectation or romance, because some bonds are deeper than that, based on mutual respect, born of pain and redemption. And when the city honored Emily with a civic award, she stood on the stage with Noah at her side, her voice steady as she told the crowd that no act of kindness is wasted, that every stranger we pass may carry a burden invisible, and that the courage to care costs nothing but means everything. And the audience rose in applause, some in tears because they knew her truth. And from that day, Hope's Corner expanded, supported by grants, donations, and the love of a community changed forever. And real-life echoes of this truth abound, like the Covenant House shelters that turned former homeless teens into staff mentors, or the Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, where former gang members find dignity in work, proving that past does not define. Future only courage does. And as Emily stood in her simple apartment window at night, Watching the city lights holding Noah's hand, she smiled knowing that she had kept her promise that their future was safe, that her strength, her kindness, her refusal to give up had shaped a legacy greater than wealth, greater than fame. And in this ending, we see that the smallest question asked with dignity may open the greatest door, that the humblest plea may touch the highest heart, and that in every crowded street, every silent corner, a story like Emily's may wait to change the world if only someone dares to see. And so if you, the viewer, remember anything, let it be this, that your quiet kindness, your unnoticed mercy, your smallest generosity may be the spark of someone's salvation, and that hope, like hunger, can be fed by a single shared meal, a gentle word, an open hand. And that is how Emily, the girl who asked for leftovers, became a queen of courage, a builder of hope, and a mother of a new tomorrow.